place in the context of Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. So there, what has happened is, Professor Kellerman mentions this vividly in the other book, is that they have been classified into kind of three categories, followers. One set of followers is called bystanders. Bystanders are people who, when there is a situation or when there is a dynamic happening, they are more concerned about themselves. They would rather say to themselves, let's stay out of the way. Let's not get into this mess. If we are safe, if we are okay, let's stay as we are. This is one category of followers. The second category of followers, especially in the Nazi context, were evildoers. People who believed that yes, especially in those times, some soldiers of the Nazi soldiers, they believed as if, murdering people is like, it's like attacking a vermin, It's some pest somewhere and we're just killing them. So they fundamentally believed in evildoing. Then there were a third category of followers who were called acolytes. Acolytes are kind of people who were mesmerized by Adolf Hitler. They said, he is the person whom we would like to follow, nothing else matters to us. Now, the point here is, these kind of, categorization can be done in our real life also. There are a lot of people like us who would not like to, get into messy issues, although some of these issues may be important to our, lives, maybe our future generations, maybe our generation also, but we would like to stay out of it. There are some people, for example, we see a lot of examples where, there's a lot of vandalism going on in the country in different parts at different points of time. They probably, these kind of people probably fall in that category of kind of evildoers. And there are certain people, of course, who are mesmerized by the leader himself. I mean, in the last election, the kind of, I don't want to sound political here, but the point here is that whatever the results showed, there was one man who was being followed by a lot of people, and they kind of completely believed in him, right? So these things play out in front of our own eyes. The question is, can we learn a little bit more about this and make ourselves a little bit more aware? Now, why do leaders behave badly? According to Professor Kellerman, she actually focuses on the trait theory of leadership, and she says that, for example, there are certain traits which are exhibited by certain people. For example, greed is one of them, which can be dangerous. So, it's not only about greed for money. Generally, when we talk about greed, we refer to greed for more money. Now, it's not only about more money, it can be about more power. It can be also, in certain cases, there are examples in the books, it can be as bad as sex. So there are different forms of greed, and people kind of, I would say, transgress and get into these dangerous zones, and then they, the whole dynamic kind of starts getting distorted. Now, I will refer, there's another interesting book, I don't know whether maybe some of you have gone through it, Why Smart Executives Fail. This is Sidney Finkelstein, he's from Tufts Business School. What he says, he mentions that, why do leaders behave badly? He says one is inability to see change in the external environments, which Professor Kellerman kind of correlates with a term called rigidity. I'll come to that, what are the different kinds of bad leadership and what is bad leadership as defined by Professor Kellerman. But here what is, the fundamental point here is that as a leader, you need to judge your internal and external environments quite well and how the environments are kind of changing around you. So based on the change, you're supposed to adapt yourself and the organization, to the changes in the external and the internal environments. Second, which is very common, is mixing personal and professional interests. A lot of people do that. And a lot of people do that quite frequently, and you can, in the corporate world, I wouldn't mind saying it's kind of rampant. A lot of people mix professional and personal issues day in and day out. Number three is, when you become a leader, for example, especially a C-level executive, that's quite a fancy term nowadays, and where, if I'm a CEO, I know everything. So that's a kind of mindset, that I know everything. That kind of mindset also leads you astray. So you kind of are unable to maintain the balance around you. Number four, this is also very common. We as people like people around us who kind of praise us, who all want to look and feel good. It happens to leaders also. Leaders generally like people around them I'm not saying all of them, but maybe some of them, people who kind of echo their voices. Yes. So there also, lies a problem of a leader kind of getting led somewhere else. Another problem which Professor Finkelstein mentions is treating most issues as transient. So what happens is, I don't know, maybe some of you would have attended the session of Mansoor Khan. Mansoor is a very favorite, a very nice way of putting it. He talks about Q to Q. I don't know whether he mentioned that in the last session. So Q to Q, actually Q to Q is his film, Qyamat se Qyamat tak and all that. But he mentions Q to Q means quarter to quarter. So that's the thing which runs in the corporate world. So if it's quarter to quarter, what happens is anything that comes your way, kind of try to brush them aside. Now what happens is sometimes you only get signals of a problem which might be very deeply entrenched in your organization. A lot of leaders, for example, fail to recognize these certain symbols which come along their way, and they kind of fail to kind of start treating them well. So there again lies the problem, and leaders kind of suddenly discover that things have gone completely horribly wrong, and then it comes to the day of the judgment, and then when everybody says that you have failed as a leader. And finally, of course, this is very commonsensical, but in any class of strategy or leadership, this is kind of very widely discussed. Whenever you kind of strategize or whenever you kind of lead, always keep the context in mind. But believe me, understanding and appreciating a context is not that easy. It's not something which is written out in a textbook written by Michael Porter, where there are 4 paragraphs of different contexts, and you kind of understand those, and by understanding those you will be able to understand what is really happening around you. It can become extremely complex. So people go wrong. Now what is also not mentioned very vividly is, what about followers? The question is, when we say that leaders behave badly, I mean, don't we think that the followers are also equally responsible? I mean, if as a leader I have a set of followers, these followers also have a relation or also have a responsibility towards me. So for example, I am not saying that following is kind of, I would say blind following. I mean, whatever I say, it's not like being an acolyte. So, I mean, for example, if a leader is wrong, probably a decision making by a leader is going wrong, I think it's also very important part of the follower or a set of followers to make the leader understand the different kind of options that can play out if such a decision is kind of taken. Now, whether the decision is accepted by the leader is also, a different topic of discussion probably. But I think the followers also have their share of responsibility in this whole process. It's not only the leaders alone. So when we say that leaders behave badly, or when the output of leadership kind of becomes something we don't want it to be, it's not only the leaders, it's also the followers. So we, as followers, and as we know that each one of us is a leader and a follower at the same time. So while we lead at in probably one context, we might be following in some other context. So it's very important that we as followers also take charge of what is happening around us. Now coming to the, now this is slightly tricky in the sense that there can be a lot of questions around it. I mean, can you really typify human behavior? Probably it's kind of risky because it's too complex to kind of put them into kind of groups. Nonetheless, what Professor Kellerman kind of mentions in the book is, her idea is not to kind of talk about, she doesn't mention about these kind of categories only about the leader. She talks about leadership. And what she says is that there's no harm if there are some categories, and if you kind of have these categories in your mind, you'll probably able to correlate with what is happening good or bad around you. So the first 3 categories which I've mentioned in the first slide, now before I kind of get into these categories, when we talk about bad leadership, what Professor Kellerman says is that bad leadership, what we mean by bad leadership is that bad leadership can happen due to 2 dimensions. One is called the unethical part of the leadership, and the third one is being an ineffective leader. So effectiveness and ethicality are the 2 dimensions she kind of discusses. The first 3, incompetent, rigid and intemperate, relate to the incompetence of a leader. So, what does she mean by incompetent leader? She says the leader and at least some followers lack the will or skill or both to sustain effective action. with regard to at least one important leadership challenge, they do not create positive